Hello crafty friends and doll lovers. Welcome back to my channel. My name is Melody and I am here today to share with you, I think it's going to be the 13th project that I completed in the Freebie Friday challenge. For those of you who are not familiar, that is a personal challenge that I made for myself this year where I go and download the free pattern that Faire.com makes available every Friday. And no matter what that pattern is, I set a goal to sew that pattern and then come and share with you my experience. So I'm here today with the Freebie Friday from a few Fridays ago, and that is this. It's the 50 shirt waist dress by Kindred Thread. It is an intermediate level sewing pattern designed to fit 18-inch dolls. It came in you had three different options. You had a sleeveless, a short sleeve, and a long sleeve option. And I made the short sleeve option. So here is Addie modeling her finished dress. Overall, this was a good pattern. It was pretty easy to follow. There are some things that I did a little bit differently just because I've tried it in other projects and I like the results better. So at the end of this video, I'm going to insert a clip where I share with you some of the things that I did to either help make it easier for me to sew or to make it look neater. So this is the sleeveless version, and I'm going to turn it around so you can see. It has a collar. And I think these are considered tucks. They might be pleats. I always get them confused, but they have them at the waist. And the way that the skirt is pleated, it's pleated so that the pleats go this way towards the center and then this way towards the center. So you'll notice that these pleats are folded this direction. These pleats are folded this direction. It has a separate belt, and I showed this to you on one of my other videos. I can't remember which one it was, where I used these they're designed they're called tri-glides, but they're designed to make dog to make dog collars. And I think they make the perfect belt buckle. So this is a 3/8 inch tri-glide. What I liked about this pattern is I do like the style. I think it's a very flattering fit, and I know that sounds funny talking about on a doll, but I like the silhouette. I like the style lines on this. The pattern itself was fairly easy to follow. The instructions were clear. In my opinion, they were clear, and the pictures helped, of course. There were a few things that were kind of a issue. The first being the button spacing. Now, I don't mark my buttons when I'm transferring the pattern markings to the pattern before I start sewing. I don't mark my buttons because no matter how well I sew the pattern, the buttons never really line up. I'm better if I go back after I've completed the garment and add the buttons. Another thing I want to tell you is this is my first time actually sewing buttonholes into a doll outfit. I've always been like this. When I'm sewing and I really have a good product and all I have to do is put the buttonholes in. I get so nervous because I'm afraid that the buttonholes are going to really screw it up and I'm going to mess up a great garment. And I felt like when I finished with this, I thought, oh my gosh, I think I did a great job sewing this. So I was very tempted to sew the buttons with the snaps on, but I decided, no, the pattern says make buttonholes. These are 3/8 inch buttons, so I'm not looking at little tiny 1/4 inch buttonholes. So I said, I'm going to try it. So I did. The buttonholes, though, when it came to marking it, I'm going to show you the pattern pieces. So this is, and you're not going to be able to see it because, it's going to be kind of weird because, so this is, I got it folded. So this is the fold, the piece that's on the fold, and this is the center front. But instead of the pattern being printed this way for the center front, it was printed this way. So you're not going to see it line up. But what I'm going to try to show you is I'm going to fold the seam allowance back and show you the spacing on the buttonhole. I had started sewing the buttonholes after using the markings, and I really wasn't paying attention. I was really trusting the markings on the pattern. And then when I sewed the buttonhole, I was like, oh wow, these buttons are not spaced evenly. So I'm going to try to hold it up. Now, mind you, it wouldn't be sewn together like this, but I'm just holding this just specifically to show you the spacing. So I folded back the seam allowance on this piece, and I'm going to overlap it. So basically, if it was sewn, if I sewed this together, it would overlap like this. Now, these two buttons are closer than these 3 buttons, and then this button and this button. So the button at the bottom of the bodice and the button at the top of the skirt, they're closer together than the other buttons. I'm used to putting buttons on so that they're spaced evenly, so I don't know if that was an intentional design in the pattern or if it was actually an error. What I did notice was that the pattern here, these two, it's always hard. I'm looking at my monitor here. So these two views, A and what's that? A and C show this dress with 5 buttons. B, if you look close, is actually 6 total buttons, and the buttons are closer together. Now, it could be because they use smaller buttons. I think, let's see, smaller buttons closer together, larger buttons, I don't know, but it may be, they may have changed the spacing because of the size of the button. I'm not sure. But what I ended up doing was I ended up spacing this, and to make it even, so they'd be even, and when I did it, it caused this button to go up, I think, higher than it looks like it is on here. Of course, it could just be my imagination. I sewed the buttonholes in, and what I learned is that it is possible to remove a buttonhole that you sewed, a buttonhole that didn't sew in properly, or in the placement wasn't placed properly. It is possible to use a very good seam ripper and remove the buttonholes without damaging the garment. So in that sense, I am empowered. I don't think I will shy away from buttonholes from this point forward. The important thing is, don't cut the buttonholes open until you know the placement's where you want it. So it was easy for me. It took some picking, it took some patience, but I was able to remove those buttonholes and place them and then sew them in. So that was one issue. The other issue is this belt. It is very tiny. I'm gonna take it off and show it to you. It's very narrow, and I had a time. It tells you to sew the right sides together and then turn it inside out. I had a time getting this turned inside out. I used a, what did I use? I don't know. I did a combination of everything. I was sticking things in to try to push this little piece in because it was sewn closed, try to push it down enough. And then I was taking crochet hooks, all sorts of things. I even have one of these loop turners, but these things here, it has a hook. I don't know if you can see that. Yeah, it has a hook, and sometimes that hook will cause you to get a pretty big hole in your tube if you don't grab it just right. But I had this. I had my crochet hook. I had everything. Finally, I don't know how long it took me. Finally, I got it turned inside out. If you have a tool that may have worked better to enable me to turn this inside out where it wouldn't be so difficult, please leave a comment below. If you're able to even leave a link, I don't know if you can leave a link in a comment, but I would love to see what you all use when you are trying to turn a very narrow tube inside out. The pattern, the 50 shirtwaist dress pattern by Kindred Thread Designs shows the instructions tell you to, when you're working on this piece here, and it's sewn into it because I was trying to save time. But when you're working on, I guess it's basically the upper bodice of the other upper back bodice. When you are attaching this, it tells you to fold under a 1/4 inch, um, fold under the 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then you're gonna bring it to the inside, and hopefully this will make more sense in a little bit. You bring it to the inside, and then from the top, you're going to top stitch. You're going to top stitch, capturing the folded hem. I don't like that way of doing things because there's too many chances for error, or for not, either it won't look as good on the inside as it does on the outside. So I tend to use a method that is similar. I think it's called the burrito method, but it's similar to, if you've made those pillowcases, it's kind of like that. So whenever I am attaching something, and this can work with a bodice lining as well, depending on how you construct the garment. But I'm going to demonstrate it here. So what you see here is I have the front bodice, the back bodice, where I've already attached the upper portion, and then this is the, basically the facing, and what's going to end up being the upper bodice, back bodice lining. So I'll turn it this way. Okay, so just so you can see, I'm hoping to get this in frame. Okay, so what I do, instead of folding this up, pressing it, turning it inside, and then top stitching, what I do is I fold, I roll this up. So here's the assembled back piece. So I'm going to roll it up until it's all the way under. Now see, when I rolled it in, you saw that the seam allowance popped out. I hope y'all can see that. So what I do is I line up the seam allowance like this. So basically, you have rolled in the lower portion of the rear bodice, you've rolled it in, and you want to push it in far enough where when you start stitching, you don't catch it in the stitching. And so basically, you are lining up, basically you're lining up your seam allowances. So I'm going to pin this, and then I'm going to show you what I mean. in case you still can't see what I'm doing. So basically, I think it's referred to as a burrito method because you are rolling up a portion of the garment like you would roll up a burrito. If you know it, if you're familiar with this and you know it by another method, please let me know. I did not come up with this. It's one of the techniques that I've come across in my sewing, and I decided to try it on in this application, and it works. So I'm now just putting my fingers through to make sure that I'm getting the lower portion out of the way. So that is now pinned to the lining, upper back lining, and I'm going to stitch on top of this stitching right here. So I'm going to line that up. I lost my pedal. Pedal wants to slide away from me. Okay. So, oops, back stitch. And I'm trying to stick to that original stitching line. It's basically the it's a 1/4 inch seam, so I'm trying to stick as close to that stitching line as I can. And I think I missed some portions of it, but I think it's enough for you to get the gist of what I'm telling you. Okay, so I have sewn this together. So this is your front. Sorry, I'm trying to get this in frame. Okay, so this is your front piece, your two front pieces. This is your back piece, and the lower portion of the back piece is still rolled up in here. So what I do is I just pull this through like you're turning it inside out. And you'll notice you're actually pulling the other front portion of the bodice through as well. Okay. Now I'm also going to go ahead. I've already clipped the corners and clipped the curves, and I love this tool. It's a tool by it's a Floriani turning tool by R&K. I love this thing because if you can see, there's a ball. It's a rounded, almost like a ball bearing, but it's not. It's all one piece. And so no matter how hard I push, I'm not going to risk ripping through here. If you have that traditional point turner, sometimes if you push too hard, you'll still end up ripping, pushing through that seam. So I discovered this tool recently, and I wish I had it years ago because it definitely makes a difference. You see, I'm pushing and I'm getting these corners out really well. And I'm going to press this in a second, but I just wanted to show you. See, now you have the inside is finished, and you're not worried about, you've caught the whole seam allowance, so you're not worried about, you don't even see the stitching because it's all encased within this lining. And then you still have, it still looks like it would have looked if I had done it the way that the pattern described. But give me a second. I'm going to go ahead and press this so you can see it better. Here is this after it was pressed, and you see it's just a neater finish. And then if you want, you can still turn it over on the right side and do your edge stitching here, which I will do later. But I like that method better than what was described. And anytime I can use this particular technique, I try to use it because I think trying to stitch from the top and making sure you're catching everything on the bottom is kind of tricky. So this is my way of dealing with that. I'm going to change my camera angle so that I can show you some other things that I do when I am constructing doll garments. And you may be familiar with some, but hopefully if you're not, it's something that can help you when you sew your doll clothes. This is the pattern piece for the skirt section, and you'll notice that you do have to put, I don't know if these are called pleats or tucks, but you do have to put these in at the waistband. And I'm going to show you what I do to make it easier for me. But I also wanted to show you what I do whenever I have to sew a dart. I don't really like sewing darts. I don't like having to mark them. And I've tried using the tracing paper and the tracing wheel with the carbon paper, and I don't like it. So I cut along the stitch line on the pattern, and I remove it, and then I use this as a template. So I just lay it on the wrong side of the fabric, and then I take usually a pencil, and I just lightly trace the dart, and then of course I flip it over to do the other side, and I trace this dart, and then it's easier for me to line up my darts and sew my darts that way. And the pencil will eventually wash out, but it's really not visible after you stitch. After you stitch, let me get this bodice. Like I did it here, and you'll see, you can't really see the pencil marks because I do it lightly, and then you're stitching on the pencil mark. So I've done this for probably years, and I really like doing all of my darts this way. I would not recommend this if you're sewing clothes for people, because the pattern paper is thinner and you can always distort your darts when you do that. But when you're looking at printing this out on printer paper, you're not really at risk of distorting it, and it's doll clothes, so I haven't found it to be an issue. So if you haven't tried it, you may want to give it a try. It does make it easier versus pulling out the tracing wheel and trying to transfer the markings to the fabric that way. So that is that. Oh, the other thing I do is I always snip a corner out of the center front at the top and at the bottom, so that when it's time to join them, see if you can see this. You probably can't see that, but right in here I took out just a little bit. Okay, I think you can see it now. I took out just a little bit of a nick, and I do that for the center front. It makes it easier to line up the corresponding pieces when it's time to add on your collar and everything. And notice this should have had the collar attached before I did this. But I mainly wanted to, I just realized I didn't put the collar on, but I mainly wanted to show you that it is possible. And it is possible with the collar on. You just have to really roll it. You roll the whole assembly up into this little area here, and then you stitch it. So whether you have a collar or not, it will work, because I did it on the one that I showed you earlier. Okay, so here's the skirt section. And again, if you can't tell, I don't really like transferring markings, because in the past I've had situations where either the marking wasn't clear enough after I transferred it, and I couldn't really see it, or no matter what type of method that I used, it ended up being permanent. A lot of times because I would forget and iron over it, and sometimes the iron will set the marking. So when I am working on tucks, let's see if I can get most of this in frame. I basically take just a little, because you're only dealing with 1/4 of an inch of seam allowance, so I just take a little bit of a snip. You snip every place that, so basically this pattern is telling you to take the dotted, fold the dotted, and have it meet the solid. So I just take a little teeny snip in each spot. Okay, so I've snipped everything across here, and then the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little teeny nip off the center, because this is going to designate my center. So now I can remove my pattern piece, but don't put the pattern piece away yet, because I don't care how many times I do this, I still get a little bit confused. So what I do is I just take the first, okay, so I line up just to get me started. And here's my first snip, and it's gonna be attached to my second snip. And it's kind of hard to see, and I'm gonna snip this one more again because it didn't, in my attempt to try to snip it, do a tiny snip, I end up not getting a big enough clip in the seam allowance. So okay, so the pattern is telling you to fold on the dotted line and bring it to the solid line. So this is just to get me started. This would be the dotted line, and this is the solid line, and I'm going to line them up just to make sure, and then I'm going to fold on that clip and bring it to this clip, and then I'm going to pin it. And once you get going, you're pretty much, the next clip you're going to fold it in. If you just keep following that pattern, you're going to keep going till you get to the center. And I'm going to go ahead and locate my center, and the fold is still here. You may not be able to see that, but I also made the clip just for good safe measure. I'm going to put a pin here because you will see that the tucks go towards the center, and I don't want to forget that I'm at the center and end up going all the way to the end. So this is just a extra safety measure to make sure I don't keep pleating, get into pleating and pleat all the pleats the same way. All right, so the center is folded, the center pieces are folded to meet, or the tucks on each side of the center are folded towards the center. So these tucks are going this way. I'm trying to get in frame. Okay, hopefully you can see that. These tucks are going this way towards the center. These tucks are going this way towards the center. And again, if you find that you are having to gather this versus easing it, you probably folded something wrong. So I'm going to take this over to the iron, and I'm going to also baste it, and then I'm going to come back and show you how to connect it to the bodice, what it should look like. Okay, so I basted these in place temporarily, and now mind you, I'm not doing this. This is more of a sample piece. So I am going to find this where I snip the center here, and I'm also going to find the center here, and you'll know the center because it's where the two pieces meet, and then line up the center. So I'm going to pin here, and then now when you're actually doing this, you will have actually followed the instructions, so it's not going to look the same. I didn't put the folds in. Okay, so you're going to attach. So you got the raw edge here. Now, by the time you get to this in the pattern, I believe you will have finished this off, just like I finished this here. But again, this is just for demonstration purposes. So this is folded out. All right, so you'll notice this pretty much lines up. When you are easing, you should only be easing in just a little bit of extra fabric. So you can see for the most part, this lines up. So what I normally do is I attach them. So if this had been a seam here, I would have lined up this seam with the side seam and lined up my edges, and then kind of pull it out, and you'll see mine is pretty much a 1-to-1 ratio. So if you are doing this and you have a whole lot of extra fabric, it's probably because you pinned something wrong. The pattern does tell you you may have to ease some in, and I believe that is just in case your pleats aren't exactly right. You might get a little bit of extra fabric. Okay, so I pinned this side, and like I said, see, it's a 1-to-1, basically 1-to-1 ratio. Had it been a little bit of extra, it would have been in this pattern piece. And what I do is I sew with the larger fabric, or the one that has the extra fabric length. I sew with that against the feed dogs or against the sewing machine bed, so that it will naturally ease, because when you're sewing fabric, unless you're using a walking foot, the top layer and the bottom layer are not moving at the same speed through your sewing machine. So if you sew with the larger layer down, that the nature of the presser foot, how the nature of how do I say this? Just by how your fabric is fed through your sewing machine, it's going to naturally ease in the fabric. So when your pattern says ease, you're not gathering. If you are gathering, then the pattern should say gather. So this is the sample that I did. And if you see here, it's pretty much a 1-to-1 ratio. There you go. So then I would go and sew this seam together, and then follow the pattern directions from that point. There you go. So I hope this helps. This is what I did. I found it to be successful. Hey, that's kind of cute. Maybe I'll make this one without the collar. I kind of like that. I might finish this and make it collarless. But I hope that helped. If you decide to make this dress, I hope you will try out these techniques. If you have some techniques that that you use, please leave that in the comments below. Last Friday, this was the free pattern. It's a Chestnut Hill keyhole dress by Clarissa's Closet. This is, again, designed to fit 18-inch dolls, and they have this skill level as an intermediate. When I was looking for fabric, I had 2 ideas. I'm thinking I'm going to do this one, the short one, the one that doesn't have the high-low hem. I'm not crazy about that high-low aesthetic. So I'm thinking I'm going to do this one. But when I was in the fabric store, I was trying to find the fabric I would use. And I did come across, I got 2 ideas. One is to use this fabric, and I was kind of concerned because I wasn't sure about the scale, but I figured if I was, I've had dresses that had larger motifs on them, so hopefully, even though this is larger than I would normally use for a doll, it might work. But I like the fabric, so even if I end up not using this fabric, I'm sure I'll find a use for it. But I was thinking of using this fabric to sew the dress and using this as a contrast. So instead of making this version with the high-low, I would still use, basically from this point up, for this contrast piece, I'm thinking of using this. And then for this piece, I'm thinking of using this. And I'm not sure what I'm going to do for the waistline treatment as far as ribbon. I'm not sure. I'm hoping I have something in my stash already. The other idea I had is I found this fat quarter, and I like it because it kind of looks like tie-dye. And I was thinking of making this version with it, with the tie-dye. So I'm not sure yet. And it's always possible I may go in a totally different direction than either of these, but I think these are a good start. And even if I don't go with it, I'm sure I'll be able to find a use for this fabric piece as well. Thank you so much for watching. Remember to like, comment, share, and subscribe, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.